Hey, thanks for stopping by. My name's Al Heilman. I live with my wife Elizabeth. We live in Willis, Texas, about 60 miles north of Houston. We live on a lake. Wonderful, wonderful sunsets and sunrises, and a great place for my studio. This video is about making an Edwardian ring with Kevin Potter dies. I have to warn you, once you start buying Kevin Potter dies and get introduced to this, it's like an addiction. But the results can be truly unbelievable. So, let's get to it. Thanks again. Hope this helps. This is the die set that I bought from Kevin Potter. In this ring you'll need to do 4 pressings, 2 for the side, 1 for the top, and 1 for the setting. I use a rolling mill to form my blanks. I usually melt it from scrap as well as adding some new metal to make a billet and then roll it out. Be sure when you're using a rolling mill that you only put your metal through one way without annealing it. Takes a lot of time, but you get a beautiful blank when it's done this way. I rolled this blank out to about 13 gauge or about 1.92 millimeters thick. You can use a caliper or a gauge to determine the thickness. Then I cut the pieces out to fit over the openings in the die. You'll need 2 pieces for the sides, 1 piece for the top, and 1 piece for the setting. These dies are designed to be used in a hydraulic press. My press was made by a master welder, and I've had it for several years and it's worked great. Kevin Potter makes great presses, so do several others. Most important thing is to keep your work centered and be sure that you know all the safety instructions about using a hydraulic press so this die doesn't come out. Keep your work centered directly over the pressure. So here we are, we're going to press the die the first time. This die, as it's pressed in here, we're trying to get an initial pattern. Once we get that pattern, then we can cut it out. You're not going to be able to get the final pressing on the first time you try this. You'll only get a small outline of what it is that you're trying to press. Once this is done, you go over to your jeweler's bench. After this initial impression, you take this to your jeweler's bench and you trim off the excess. What you see is that these are about halfway through. They've been pressed twice. They will be trimmed after each pressing, then annealed before they go back in the press. Once you get the final design, take a file and trim off the edges to get it smooth. I like to use a rotary file. Use this very slow, but it works great. It saves me a lot of time. So here's a trick I learned from Cynthia Ide. If you put Sharpie all over your metal and then heat it up until the Sharpie is gone, your metal is annealed. This works great, and it's a visual guide as to when your temperature is hot. Be sure you have oxygen or some yellow left in your flame so that you don't over-oxidize your metal and ruin it during your annealing step. So there's 3 steps: anneal, press, and trim. In this ring, I went through those steps 3 different times before I got the detail that I needed. That was all that was in the die. The next step is to form the dome that'll form the top of the ring with damping dies. So I needed to dome the top, and I couldn't use a metal doming block because I was afraid that I would lose the detail. So I used a Delrin doming block, and I have some Delrin damping punches that work great. These were bought many moons ago from Otto Fry, and I think they still sell them. This block is absolutely fabulous, and here is the resource to find that. So once the top was formed, you can see that it didn't lose any of its character, and I was able to form the bottom. Next, you're going to form the shank. Use hard solder and solder these 2 pieces together. You can see how the ring shank will curve underneath the dome and be soldered there and attached to the ring. So the ends of the sides of the ring needed to be dapped around so that they would sit underneath the top. I used again part of the Delrin block to do this, and it worked great. This shows how I used a steel rod to form the piece in the Delrin block. After bending the ring around a ring mandrel, I used some files to shape the top so that it would fit up underneath the bottom. This took some trial and error. It didn't take forever, but it's important that you get this to fit perfectly so that when you solder it, you have a good solder joint. You all have seen soldering, so I'm not going to show a video of that, but I use these clamps a lot. Jan Harrell, my metalsmithing and enameling teacher, showed me how to make these clamps with coat hangers, and they work well. Or you can buy titanium clamps. The titanium are a little more expensive, but they work just as well. This is a source for the titanium soldering clips. There's many out there if you just do a Google search. This diagram shows the 4 joints. You've got 2 sides and a bottom. I do those first with hard solder, and then I put on the top with medium solder. If you're using a ring soldering forceps, be careful, because that bottom joint, if you put pressure on it, it gets hot, it will come apart. Next step is to fabricate the setting. Next was taking your time to file the top. I used triangular files, then I used Barrett files to finish it out. When you're done, you had a beautiful star that worked great as the top. You can see the bottom side of the ring and how these 2 sides come underneath and attach. They're soldered there. You can clean up your solder joint a little bit more if you wish. You can also see how I trim the underside of the hole where the stone sets so there's no roughness. Next, I took a nylon needle nose pliers and I bent the sides up of the prongs, drilled a hole in it, and then affixed it to the base so that I could solder it on. You need to remember you're dealing with 4 different joints here. You're dealing with the top, you're dealing with the sides, and you're dealing with the bottom of the ring. Not everyone will choose to replace the bottom of the ring, but I did. And once you get it all together, it works great. I use hard solder for the bottom and medium solder to solder on the setting. Using these wires to hold it tight when you're soldering is very important, because you don't want it to move, and we all know how when you flux something and get heat to it, it tends to dance around. You can use steel wires, or in this case I used a stainless steel wire so that I don't forget when I put it in my pickle that I ruined my pickle batch. So the next step is to set your stone. I used a 8mm blue topaz stone. Be sure and polish the inside of your setting before you put your stone in. When you put your stone in, it should sit flat. It should be evenly covered by the prongs. I use a GRS Benchmate, as this helps me hold the stone so that I can see all the different sides and make sure that it's level and even. Once that's completed, I use some setting pliers to raise the prongs. These are some prong pushers that I made. They work great. Took a piece of brass solid rod, cupped the end, and made a micarta pusher as well with a golf ball that I use for several of the tools in my shop. It's a great handle and fits my hand well. Setting stones is an art form, and there are people that are much better at this than I am, but you can see how we've taken the prongs and gently bent them over and pushed them on top of the stone. One prong was a little bit short, but it still turned out fine. If this was being done again, I would make the prong a little bit longer. You can see that the stone sits nicely into the top of the ring. Make sure that the stone doesn't poke through the underside of the hole. When you look at the top of the ring, you should see that the prongs are evenly spaced. The ends of the prongs can be filed, or they can be finished with a shofu disc, which is how I finished the prongs in this ring. Make sure when you set the stone in that the stone does not hang down below the inside of the ring. This is the final ring once I cleaned it up, fabricated it, hallmarked it. Turned out beautiful. Lovely Edwardian ring, great dies from Potter USA. This was a bit of an advanced project. If you had no jewelry making skills, you might scratch your head a couple of times, but this is something that you can get done. Just take your time and interpret it however you want. There's probably several different ways to interpret this ring, but I am very pleased how it turned out. You can reach me at www.alhalmanart.com. My Instagram handle is alhalmanart, same with Facebook. Thanks for your time, and I hope this video gave you some help. Till we meet again. Bye.